All right, welcome to our podcast on capital letters. This is a pretty important skill to make sure that you have grasped or reviewed as we continue to attempt to move our writing from more informal pieces to more formal pieces. Capitalizing certain things is essential in making that jump. So we just want to remind you of some of the rules that are essential in getting that down. So the first thing to look at is, why do these even matter? I mean, they are a cultural symbol of respect that we as a writing society have determined certain rules around what should be capitalized, which in turn then makes it stand out from the rest of the document. And so we have, as a society, have agreed upon these things, and so we as new writers need to make sure that we are following those rules. And because they are capitalized, it does denote that they are important. And they do stand out from the rest of the text, and it should send a clear message from writer to reader that this is, following the rules that we're going to talk about, but also that it is more important than the words surrounding it. So there are many capitalization rules, but we're going to focus on the big three that tend to come up not only in the freshman year, but throughout most academic writing. And those deal with sentence format, proper names, nouns, people's titles, things like that. And then the last one is the idea of rules around titles of sources and how we capitalize those. So let's take a look at each one in turn. First one, sentence format. So the first thing, in terms of looking at capitalization in sentences, we obviously need to capitalize the first letter of a sentence. That's just a given, one would hope. But sometimes as we're moving from the world of texting to the world of typing, we think that we don't need to for some reason, because normally our phone will auto-correct that for us. But when we're typing just on good old-fashioned Word or even handwriting things, we do need to remember that we need to capitalize those things. Another thing to think of in terms of sentence format is that we do need to capitalize the first words of quoted material. And so in this example, he said, "Don't go near that alligator." This is actually dialogue where we have a character talking, but for the most part, if we are quoting material from a book, we do need to capitalize that. That's pretty much it on that first one. Those are kind of some givens, but let's move on to the next one, proper nouns, titles, and names. So first off, let's define what a proper noun is. That will help us figure out why we need to capitalize that. Basically, it is a noun that labels a specific person, place, thing, or idea. And so that could be a specific person. Also, the picture in the middle represents a specific region, as in the West. And so since it is a specific region, it's not just saying, oh yes, the school is more west of King Soopers. I mean, it is actually talking about a specific place, the West, meaning, the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains. And so since it is a specific place, something like that does get a capital letter. But let's take a look at some more examples here. People's names, obviously, should be capitalized. Specific places should be, cities, countries, things like that. You can see those middle examples, the West or the Great Plains. I mean, those are specific names given to specific regions. So if we were to say something like, To Kill a Mockingbird takes place in the South, that should be capitalized because that is a specific region. On the converse side, if we were to say, yes, you need to go south 3 blocks and then take a left, that's not a region, that's just a direction. So regions get capitalized, but directions do not. Some more proper nouns. Specific groups' names should be capitalized. So the Red Cross, the U.S. Army, Army should be capitalized because that is part of the name. The full name of this group is the United States Army. And so you would capitalize that to be proper. And then the last one, Legacy High School Marching Band. I mean, that is an entity. That is a specific group. And so it needs to completely be capitalized like it is in the example. Moving on to titles. These are a little less obvious sometimes, but they are important to use at times. So we should capitalize a person's title if used before their name. But if we're just using the title, we don't need to capitalize that. For example, Zookeeper Peterson opened the gate slowly. That is a title, Zookeeper. And since it is attached to his name, then you definitely need to capitalize both. Example 2, if we're just using the title with no name, just the random zookeeper opened the gate, we don't need to have that capitalized. Another one that comes up is the word president. So if we were to say, the President of the United States, yes, we need to capitalize President and United and States. President John F. Kennedy, yes, we should capitalize P and then his name. But if we were saying something like, yes, I just met with the president of the Safari Club or something like that, then you wouldn't capitalize P in president just because it's not, the president of the U.S., and we don't know who that is. So it's not as specific. And then with titles, we do capitalize the title when we are using it in direct address, like we're talking to that person, like, why do you think this is happening, President? We would need that comma before the direct address, and then we do need the capital P for President, something like that. And then if you are using that as some sort of signature, you would capitalize that also at the end there. Probably the biggest source of capitalization errors come from this section where we're talking about how we capitalize text sources. And so let's see if we can be clear about what that means. So the first thing, in terms of titles of texts, when we capitalize books, poems, websites, blogs, and other things, we do need to capitalize these things. The first and last words of the title. Okay, so make sure that that's kind of a given. Any other words within there, such as is, are, and be, those should definitely be capitalized because they are part of that title. But we do not capitalize small, connector words, a and the, things like that, or prepositions. So, of mice and men, you would capitalize the O, the M, and then the M again. But you would not need to capitalize the A, as in and. To kill a mockingbird, you capitalize the T, and the K, and the M, but you do not capitalize the A. So here's some more examples. Books, The Idiot's Guide to Feeding Children to Alligators. We need to capitalize all the major important words in there, but the words to do not need to be capitalized. Not just they don't need to be, they should not be. My Alligators Dream of Children, as a poem example, of does not need to be capitalized there. When we look at websites, some of these become a little bit more difficult because sometimes they're not just one-word titles. The first example, I buy all my alligators from crocodilian.com. It's a one-word title. It's a specific website. It should be capitalized with the C. Amazon, Wikipedia, if you're ever talking about those, they are specific sites and they should be capitalized. Here's where it gets a little dicey. Sometimes you have people who name their websites, everything you need to know about books or something like that. And it's kind of a weird title. So do you capitalize, everything you should need, not the word to, know about books? I feel like the default is that you should capitalize those things. We just want to make sure that we are offering that specific site due respect by making sure that we have its most proper capitalization. Blogs give us another difficult thing in terms of capitalization because, again, some of them are kind of weird. Say yes to alligators.com or thevideoninja.com. The words themselves have been all smashed together. And so even though we can type in, thevideoninja.com in all smaller letters, all lowercase letters on our browser and actually get to that blog, if we are including that information in a paper, we do need to go back and capitalize those. And so there's some gray area there, but I'm always a fan of defaulting to more capitalization to make it clear than to less. We do need to be careful about overcapping, meaning doing too many capitalizations just because we think we should. We don't get to cap things just to make them stand out in an academic paper. If you want to make a point, you don't cap it. There are certain rules that need to be followed. Now, if it's dialogue, if you have two characters talking back and forth in some sort of a novel situation, and you want to have them shouting at each other, sure, cap away. Do whatever you feel you need to do. That's in a novel. But in an academic essay, you have to be cautious of the rules, and therefore what you do and don't capitalize. Okay? Then the next bullet, we don't just cap something because it's important to us as writers. Okay? We need to follow the rules. There are exceptions to the capping rules that we just set up, and the biggest one to try to explain at the top there, if someone or something has intentionally capitalized itself in a certain way, we as writers must follow that. For example, all of the Apple products have the little I before them, the iMac, the iBook, the iPhone, iPod, all of those. For whatever reason, they have chosen to capitalize those with a little I and then a capital P-O-D. That's their corporate capitalization, and therefore we need to follow that. So whenever we're writing those papers for a science class or a technical part or L2K and we're researching those, we need to follow their capitalization. That's what they've set up. The artist will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas, he writes his name like that. Will, period, I, period, am. And so that's how it is. We don't get to just write William. We need to follow his capitalization and punctuation rules. So that's something he has set up, and therefore we as writers need to honor that and follow that pattern. The last one, not trying to be regionalist or religious here, but this is something that comes up at times more on the world studies end than the American studies, since we don't write so much about religion yet. But the word God, when referring to a Christian, Jewish, or Muslim God, is capped. While if we're talking about the Greek gods, the God in that case is not capitalized. And, basically the people who have the power get to set the rules. And so since we are in the West, meaning Western Europe or North America, and we are writing about Western religion, so to speak, then we capitalize God in that setting. But when talking about Greek gods, Hera, Zeus, Hercules, that kind of stuff, we don't capitalize them. And so something pretty minor, but it may come up at some point. And so that is about it in terms of this podcast of direct instruction. Please make sure you've taken notes on this and that you've brought any questions you have about the capitalization rules to class. We will go over those questions there and then do a little bit of practice, kind of seeing how all these things fit together in real writing. As always, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, have a great one.